Good afternoon. Walt Whitman said that the decay of the body is the poet's only subject, perhaps because he grasped that it is the most intimate way to mark the passage of time. Our bodies affect our experiences and navigation of the world, and so we want to ask, how much power does a body, pertaining, for instance, to race, gender, sexuality, physical ability, have over or in any particular artist's work? With what means can a writer navigate issues the body presents? This panel has a particular resonance for me, since I have spent much of this week at doctor's appointments, recalling at several moments my mother's sage advice: old age is not for sissies, which for writers means discovering new ways to tell the story of the passage of time, the theme of this week's panel discussion on the body. My thanks to the staff here at the Iowa City Public Library, which provides the space for us to meet each week, to Downing Thomas, Dean of International Programs at the University of Iowa, who provides the money for the pizza and drinks in the back, and to Lee Marshall, our research assistant from the MFA program in playwriting at the university, for help with the writers' presentations. If you don't have a copy, please go to Lee and you will find them. For our audience watching at home, please visit the website of the International Writing Program, iwp.u Iowa, where you will find full biographies of the writers, samples of their work, and past presentations from these weekly panel discussions. We have a terrific lineup of writers to speak for you today, and we will begin with a 2008 IWP alum, Carlos Gamero, who returns to us for a teaching residency at Grinnell College. He has published 6 novels, a collection of short stories, and a body of literary criticism, as well as translations of seminal English language literary works, including Shakespeare, W.H. Auden, and Harold Bloom. His own works have been translated into German, English, Turkish, and French, and his script for 3 of Hearts was made into a feature film in 2007. Sitting next to him is Julie Ketzi, who is a graduate of the University of Iowa's Nonfiction Writing MFA program and currently serves as the department's postgraduate provost fellow. She is a former professional athlete and also works as an athletic trainer, as well as an analyst and color commentator for Invicta Fighting Championships. And I will just say, you do not want to meet Julie in a dark alley. She will explain more, I suspect, in her talk. Novelist, publisher, and performer Yamkela Twaikadi has also founded a company that develops mobile apps and board games. Often working in South Africa's native languages, she has published 15 books. Her first Shihosa novel is used in Shihosa classes throughout the country. She is on the Mail and Guardian's list of 200 young South African leaders for 2019, and she participates in this fall residency courtesy of the U.S. Consulate General in Johannesburg. Finally, Ben Sohib is best known for his popular novels, the Da Pecci Code and Rosit and Delia, which was adapted to film as 3 Hearts, 2 Worlds, and 1 Love. The film garnered the award of Best Film at the 2010 Indonesian Film Festival. He has published 5 books, including 2 short story collections, and has represented Indonesia at many international arts festivals. He participates in this year's fall residency courtesy of the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. And we will follow our customary practice of the writers will give short presentations, and then we will open it up to questions. I think, do we have copies of paper to go around, or are we just going to run around with the mic today? We'll run around with the mic. And I urge everyone to keep the questions pointed, which is to say less heavy on the commentary, more on the question for these distinguished writers. Carlos?
Hello. Is this working? Yes? Good. Thank you, Chris, for your words. Thank you, Lee, for your help. Thank you, all of you, for being here. It feels so good to be back. Before getting started on writing and the body, I'd like to say a couple of things about reading and the body. Vladimir Nabokov located the organ of aesthetic delight in those tiny little hairs at the back of our necks. When we read something really good, they stand up, even against our will. Alternatively, he offered the chill that runs down our spine. Allen Ginsberg suggested that a line of really good poetry alters the chemistry of our brain forever. No iron can pierce the human heart as chillingly as a full spot put just at the right place, Isaac Babel famously said, famously quoted by Raymond Carver. Nabokov didn't say, to my knowledge, where the organ of perception of bad writing resides. In my case, I suppose it is somewhere around the pit of my stomach. That sinking feeling is unmistakable. It's just as painful as eating bad food and equally lethal. Even reading something really good afterwards doesn't quite purge the sensation, just as treating yourself to a gourmet dinner after eating junk food won't save you from gastric despair. The thing is that we read with all of our bodies, not just our minds, or even our minds and hearts. We read with mouth, stomach, thighs, genitals, fingernails. Every one of our cells is involved in the process, not only of enjoyment and appreciation, but also of understanding. Meaning explodes within us, expands our solar plexus. Not getting it brings us down, like a miserably wet day or a bout of depression. This may be one of the reasons why when I write fiction I still put pen to paper, watching, feeling the way the ink flows, the way the letters shape themselves. I can tell if one or another of the muses are inhabiting my body or if they are away shopping somewhere. Even before I reread the sentences, even before I consider their meaning, the stroke tells me whether I'm in that world, the world of my characters, their language, their feelings, or still trapped within my own. But even better than strokes are sounds. In the final stages of correction, I read my text out loud into a tape recorder and then listen to it. This is somehow the final test. Many things that looked wonderful on the written page suck big time when read out loud. This led me to coin a useful maxim, at least for myself. Whatever works on the written page will not necessarily work in an oral rendering, but whatever works orally will also work on the page. Literature began as recitation and music and has never become quite divorced from it. We should remember that silent reading, reading without speaking out the words, had to be invented. In one of his essays, the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges recalls a passage from St. Augustine's Confessions, where the church father remembered with perplexity how Bishop Ambrose would, I quote, gaze at the pages, penetrating their soul through their sense alone, without moving his tongue or uttering a sound, end of quote. Silent reading, the printing press, and computers have somehow distanced reading and writing from the body, and might mislead us to believe reading and writing are primarily mental acts. They are not. We associate certain writers with certain bodies, the starved prose of Kafka with tubercular emaciation, Hemingway's muscular prose with buffalo hunting, Whitman's exuberance with good health and lots of organic food and open air. But this might be misleading. After reading Gargantua and Pantagruel, one can only imagine Rabelais as fat, but the existing portraits show a rather lean, scraggly type. There is nothing particularly emaciated about the prose of Orwell's 1984, yet his biographer describes its dying author as a tubercular skeleton. And if a certain kind of writing comes from a certain kind of bodies, how many bodies must Shakespeare have had? All the bodies in the world. Perhaps it is better to think not of how the body affects writing, but of how writing affects the body. What virtual body or bodies the writers create for themselves and for their readers through the materiality of their style or styles. Thank you very much.
Well, as alluded to earlier, I used to be a professional mixed martial arts fighter, so I used to be a cage fighter, in other words. And I have to say, when I was asked to do this panel, I felt like I was being put into a cage with heavyweights. These are some extremely illustrious writers sitting beside me, and I'm very honored to be in their company. The excerpt that I'm reading today is from an essay from an upcoming book that I have called In Oblique Order. That's a tentative title. My agent does not like it, so we'll see. We'll see if that sticks. And if it seems like it's a little all over the place, I wanted to offer an apology for that, but I don't think I will. I've cut it down from a quite lengthy chapter, a quite lengthy essay, but the truth of the matter is, when we think about the body and we think about writing, the things that happen with our bodies when we write, we don't always notice. It kind of gets away from us sometimes. A finger going here, a foot is tapping. At times, our body goes on adventures that we're not even aware of because we're so into the words. And so if this flows around and goes from topic to topic and seems a little bit off, I could blame the editorial choices I made in this excerpt, or just let you know that the body was a lot more present when I was writing and when I was editing than, maybe the mind was on one topic. So this is actually from an essay called The Crocodile and the Pudding Lady. I kind of like Crocodile's Pudding as a title. I didn't put that there, but I'm really enjoying it. So, Coach told me that the first time he wrestled a crocodile, he wept, sobbed as he clung to the muddy, scaly armor, inhaling steamy, rotten breath from her nostrils. I envy the crocodile's four-chambered heart. It is an extra valve. A cog snaps into action after a kill, allowing the right aortic arch to shut off completely. The left aortic arch redirects flow of blood to her stomach, bypassing the lungs. This surge of CO2-enriched blood increases her stomach's acidity threshold. She has the highest blood acidity level of any living vertebrate. But a crocodile needs more acid to digest bones and gristles. She swallows her food whole. You have to wrap your hands in gauze and tape before a fight to keep the smaller bones from breaking. It's an intimate ritual for fighters. You surrender your most valued weapon to your coach. You sit facing one another as you quietly breathe the same air together, layers of gauze held in place by athletic tape, wound around the wrist, twined between the fingers, armor and crisscrossed X's. A hard lump of calcium sits underneath my right pointer finger, nearer to the wrist than knuckle, from a fight in 2008. I had a new coach, my coach, who, when no one was looking, stroked my hair and kissed me in that sacred space before the fight. During that fight, my hand slipped from my glove and my fingers got caught. The wrap stayed in place, but my sense of self-preservation did not. No longer able to make a fist, I switched from punching to slamming my opponent with the back of my hand. When the ref tried to raise my hand at the end of the fight and declare me the winner, I yanked it back in pain. The residual calcium lump sits now as an extra knuckle above my wrist, bisected by a protruding blue-green vein. When the weather gets cold, the years I spent punching and trying to hold on to other people makes my hands throb. I press the lump for comfort, sometimes trying to mash it flat, sometimes just rubbing the vein back and forth, as if to resolve one with the other. My hands always bled during fights, the gauze turning rusty with dried blood from the pressure of skin around knuckles, chafing against constraint. Knobby bones, trying to carve their way free. Thin skin. I worked hard to become the ideal mistress for Coach. You convince yourself into belief as a fighter. Self-deception insinuates itself into the deeper, uncertain terrains. But once I saw an elderly woman sitting at a table alone. I can't remember the color of her hair. What I remember is that she was sitting in a booth across the aisle, alone, with 2 dishes of pudding. I remember a softness. A body allowed cushions and curves. A soft body alone, with 2 dishes of pudding. As I watched her carefully spoon chocolate pudding from a curved glass dish into her mouth, I remember how a sharp pang tightened my diaphragm, how panic gripped my throat. When she finished the first dish, she placed it down and picked up the second dish of pudding, and I felt my eyes fill. She ate it with just as much stillness, just as much deliberation, and that's when I began to unravel. I began to have nightmares where I'm screaming at Coach to hear me, hear me. I'm terrified I'll become the pudding lady, resigned, alone, afraid I'll eat a second dessert with deliberate little bites, because there will be no one to eat it with me, because I've forgotten that I can swallow a thing whole, that I know the right way to wrestle something, to grip, to keep fighting, afraid I've lost the ability to find a way to keep hitting. When he spoke of wrestling the crocodile, Coach cast her as both evolutionary marvel and successful conquest. She survived asteroids. She was proof of his mastery over anything he wants, even dinosaurs. But myself, I love the crocodile because of her osteoderm armor and the acid in her heart, because she can swallow bones. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is it on? Okay. So I was raised by my grandmother, the most loving woman I've ever met. She loved us equally. Us, being her grandchildren, she was raising while our parents were in Johannesburg, working or looking for work. My grandmother would say, "Akukho nkwenkwe, akukho ntombazana kulo mzi wam, kukho abantwana." There is no boy or girl in my house, they are children. To this day, all my male cousins do not have a problem with cleaning, cooking, or doing laundry for themselves, while a huge population of men in my country, or Africa, or the world as a whole, wait on women to serve them. As much as my grandmother raised us equally, there was one area where she failed dismally, and that was her teaching us on how we expressed our bodies in the spaces we were occupying. When I was the age of 13, I was informed that I would need to go and do virginity testing, which was a ritual that was done in my village annually. The oldest matriarchs of the village would gather at the king's homestead, and all the girls who had turned 13 would line up outside the hut where the matriarchs were, and one by one go in to open their thighs as wide as they could so that these old women could check if they were still intact. If you were found to be a virgin, you would be told to stay away from boys, to not open up your thighs for boys. In fact, you could actually fall pregnant by just talking to a boy. If you were found not to be a virgin anymore, you would be rejected by the village because you had allowed a boy to get into your father's kraal without paying a dowry for you. You would then be forced to tell who you slept with. The matriarchs would take you to the boy's family. The whole village would come out and watch you as you walked down the streets to the boy's house. If the boy agreed that he slept with you, he would be forced to pay for damages, for damaging you. You were damaged goods, not him, you. This is the kind of environment I grew up in. The sad thing about it all is that no one dared the boys to take down their pants and examine their penises to check if they were still virgins. No one dared tell them to stay away from girls. No one humiliated them in public for not being virgins. Boys were boys and allowed to live freely in their bodies. Moreover, boys could choose any girl they wanted, abduct her, and force her into marriage without her consent. The only expectation from the community was that he sends dowry to the girl's parents. You see, my grandmother's teachings about my body, or rather the lack thereof, resulted in me believing every word she taught me. I grew up in a village with no electricity or running water, so we had no TV to watch or learn or unlearn things our elders taught us. I am glad that I later got to unlearn what my grandmother taught me and liberated my body from her chains. My struggles and anger about how the society expects women to carry themselves inevitably found their way into my writing. I found the pages of my book to be venting spaces for me. In 2016, I published a novel in isiXhosa titled Ndibuyisele Esizalweni. I wrote this novel for the people back in my village. I did not want to gain any money from the book. It was an activism tool for me to force my village to face themselves and see the damages they have caused to girls and women. I wrote this novel because I was angry, and I still am. I am angry at the society that keeps telling women to obey men, cook for them, clean after them, tend to their feelings, and forgive them when they cheat because boys will always be boys. I write because it is my way of rebelling against the society that does not value me. I write because I miss my aunt who was raped, hacked, and dumped into a river. Her remains have never been found. I write because I miss my friends who were abducted for marriage at a very young age, and they never got to pass through university doors. I write because of the pain I felt as a child seeing the men in my family abusing their wives. I write because I have a daughter. I write because every day as I open my eyes and prepare to face the world, I know it will not receive me on the sole basis of me being a human being. It will receive me on the basis of being a woman. There is war on our bodies as women. Our bodies have become crime scenes. And this is for Uine Nemhwekyana, Karabo Mokwena, Natasha Konabia, Dombizoto Toto Matikizela, Riva Steenkamp, Lee Andre Jagels, and thousands of African women. Thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to read my short paper, The Body Rejects Verdict. There was a time when I felt the body, its physical appearance, the shape of the eyes, nose, and the color of the skin was a judge gavel pounding wherever I went. With a gavel, people would judge my identity in the sense of ethnicity, religion, and lately even political preferences. In a country such as Indonesia, where socio-political relations are very complex, a certain condition identity becomes a big issue for many people, including myself. Born to the Hadrami minority, as Indonesian of Yemeni descent are referred to, I received a verdict of identity at a very young age. I was 6 when our family moved to a small mountainside village in the eastern tip of the island of Java. There, my father worked as supervisor of state-owned coffee plantation. The first week were the most difficult time for me and my siblings. The eldest was 11 years old, not only as we had to live in a new place, but also because we were terribly bullied by local children. The kids would shout and follow us everywhere. Some adult who could not bear seeing us paraded this way would tell them to stop. But others could hardly hide a smile. They too enjoyed the spectacle, although eventually they became used to the shape of our eyes and noses. Racial attacks would continue for years, like when I fought with one of the boys over a kite. It made me often complain to God, why was not I born similar to them? Why am I different? I needed a lot of time to finally see in this bad fate the biggest motivator for my creative potential. I would endlessly question why some people are born as majority and others are not. Why were some people identity markers so obvious while the other they were vague? Why were some babies born to Muslim families and others to Christian ones? With various possibilities contained within them, these questions become the starting point for my writing. Breathless and with my legs trembling, I watched how the shop owned by the people of Chinese descent were demolished and set on fire during riots before the fall of Suharto regime in 1998, how churches blazed in East Java, how Christians in Ambon killed their Muslim neighbor and vice versa, how mosques were burned in Papua, how the Dayak in Kalimantan with weapons in their hands stopped and searched buses for the Maduris, how the houses of the Shia and Ahmadi minorities were reduced to ashes in Madura and West Java, I watched it and my legs trembled, like back then when village kids made a show of me, but my hand was not trembling. My hand was steadily writing, and I could write a lot with the belief that until they hear it themselves, no one can feel the horror of the strike of a gavel against the table of prejudice. Through writing other creative work, I've been trying to prevent people from turning my body and the bodies of others into a gavel of passing a verdict of identity. I am already far from all things primordial. I've been far from identities, be they ethnic or religious, since I left them behind to arrive at the calm river called selfhood. Amid a very political year and the spread of religious conservatism in Indonesia, as well as the strengthening of right-wing politics globally, pessimism has settled in my mind whether indeed it is possible to get away from the deadly verdict of stereotyping that has been adopted in such a massive way. Then again, I've convinced myself that I am already in a safe place. The mass trial will continue, but I am not in the dock. It is a trial in absentia. Is this an attempt at self-appeasement and self-deception? Maybe, but at least it keeps me writing. Thank you.
What a dazzling collection of essays. So we'll open it up for questions. And Lee has got the microphone, so make sure you speak into the microphone so that the audience at home can hear it. While you gather your thoughts, can I ask, Jan Kellett, what was the reaction of your village to the novel you wrote for the villagers?
It was mixed reactions. I got, firstly, let me state that I come, like I said on the essay, that I come from a village where there's still a lot of poverty. Mm-hmm. So people would choose to buy bread over a book. Yeah. So which is why then I decided not to make money out of the book. So, and I was very impressed by the fact that people were actually interested in reading the book, and they gave me their views, some not in a very nice way. My grandmother, for example, so I stay in Johannesburg, my grandmother still stays in my village, and some people would go to her and tell her that she must talk to me because I'm spreading a very wrong message to the people. But some people started opening up. I'm actually working on a documentary now, interviewing women who were abducted and forced to marriage in my village. And those are the women who came up and said, this is what happened to me, you know. So there are people, mostly women are saying thank you for writing. Few men are saying, I remember this boy that I used to go to school with, and he abducted a girl when he wanted a wife. And he sent me a private message on Facebook and said, you've made me to actually do an introspection of what I did to that girl. I'd never thought that it was wrong because it was part of our culture. But now I realize what a bad thing I did. I still don't agree with some of the things that you're saying in the book, but for me, I thought that's a start. So it was a mixture of feedback. Yeah.
What a fascinating answer. I want to follow up with one thing. The ones who told your grandmother that you were sending the wrong message, do you think they actually read it? Because I think the question is really, did you render that situation? Did they agree that you had adequately rendered their situation, or were they just imagining it as a work of propaganda?
I'm not sure. Can you please repeat the question, Chris?
Well, some of the villagers told your grandmother that you were spreading the wrong message.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if they had actually read the book.
They did.
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
From really old men in my village to young people, they did. Yeah. And I think it also had a huge impact on the young girls, because this culture of looking down on women in my village made girls to never dream, because what was the point of dreaming? When you were either going to be impregnated by a boy, and once you're pregnant, you are forced to go and marry this boy, or you were going to abducted to marry. So what was the point of dreaming? So, but now I'm called to schools in my village, and I have to go and motivate girls, and they're dreaming, and they're asking, what can I do once I finish grade 9? Where can I go? Which university can I go to? You know, so I think it had, and I never thought that it would be, it would have such a huge impact. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Questions? Well, here and then.
I'm teasing Carlos that he doesn't include women writers in his university class. And now you did it again, Carlos. And I want to ask you publicly, if you would rewrite this paper, this wonderful and very intellectual paper that I really loved, including women writers, whom would you include? I was thinking, for instance, Virginia Woolf, How to Be Ill, or the wonderful book of Lucia Berlin that came out 2 years ago, and you can see the body of women. Many, many examples, but I wanted to push you in this direction and make you think about women bodies, women writers' bodies.
Yes, thank you for this once again. The first question is more easily answered. I would include not only Virginia Woolf, you have mentioned, Clarice Lispector, whom we also talked about, the Brazilian writer, Carson McCullers, Flannery O'Connor. These are the first. In Argentine literature, Silvina Ocampo, who was not only wrote wonderfully about women from her perspective, but she wrote not, I would say, not so much from the perspective of women, but from the perspective of girls, little girls, and she did this quite uniquely. Now, in this frame, I mean, your first observation concerned my course at Grinnell, and I fully acknowledged my guilt and sort of responsibility in this. Now, as you say, it appears that I've done it again. But in this case, I think I am writing a sort of personal paper about my own experience when writing with my body. I mean, if I had a woman's body, I think, of course, I would have from that physical situation, I would have included maybe only women writers and not any men.
Can I just add, Carlos, when you were talking about the stroke of the pen will tell you if the sentence you're writing, if you're in it or not. And it made me think that Margaret Atwood would say she always writes by hand because she felt a connection between her brain and her hand that was not so much there in the typing. Can you describe what that stroke feels like when it's right? How does that? What's the difference between that and a stroke that doesn't work?
Well, I didn't know this about Margaret Atwood. There we go again. But I absolutely agree.
You can add her to the list.
Yes, definitely. It's exactly the same sensation. When I was writing this, I felt also a deep nostalgia for those, or a nostalgia or maybe a melancholia, because in the sense that it's not an experience I've had, for those cultures where calligraphy is so important. And we know that in some literatures, literature and calligraphy cannot be separated. We have done that, and I think that that's a loss. I try not from a sort of cultural point of view, but more from my own individual resistance to keep that connection. And I mean, the way it feels like, Chris, it feels just like when you're dancing, and instead of being in the dance and enjoying it and feeling your body expand, you think, oh my God, everybody must be looking at me and thinking, what a terrible dancer this guy is.
Perfect.
I was just curious of the women, the young girls in the village. Do you know if they've been resisting some of the cultural ways now after your book was offered to them to read?
So the abduction of women and forcing them into marriage in my village has kind of gone down now, because some women have actually stood up and taken the men to court. So I think men are just like, okay, I don't want to go to jail. So I think there is no physical resistance, or maybe there was a march or anything like that. But I think they're just aware now that they do not have to say yes to this cultural practice in my village. So I think it's just an awareness that they didn't have before. Yeah.
I have a question for Julie. I don't think a lot, I was at IW many years ago, and I don't think a lot of writers have your profile of being a writer and an athlete at the same time. I was just wondering whether in conversations with other writers, or even while working at your own work, you find it brings some other dimension that you can put on the page.
My history as a fighter?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. It is funny because, as I said earlier, I feel like I'm with heavyweights right now. I mean, these people are incredible that I'm surrounded by right now. And I actually felt that way when I was in graduate school and when I was writing. But what I did have in the back of my mind when people were referencing Heidegger and things that I had not read in 15 years because I was fighting, and I was being hit in the head for a living, philosophy wasn't the first thing on my mind. So when I came back to writing, all I could think of sometime was, well, you can't kick me. I will kick you in the head. You can talk about Heidegger, but I will drop you. And it's an incredibly violent response. But it was actually, it was something that kept me sane. Understanding that my relationship with my body, when I'm writing, it's hard to pull anything away from it. I came to graduate school saying, I'm not going to write about fighting. I'm done fighting. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. And it was all I could write about. Because even the way I would hold on to a pen or pound, everything was kind of confrontational. Everything was aggressive. And it really did help me to channel the tools that I developed over the years in disciplining my body to go into the words. And so it made me feel like I belonged in the room, if that makes sense.
We've got to get it on the mic first.
Oh, sorry.
I wanted to ask you about body description. It's all about the body, right? Toni Morrison's Beloved, when she described that my wrought iron back, as slaves have been wept so much into the scars, look like wrought iron. And then a book by Nell Larson, Passing, the mulatto body in passing. And it's like Bessie Head said, it's all a matter of power, how you can make this descriptive and how that gives you power. So that's my question.
So how do you find the relationship between describing the body in writing and charged experiences of bodies in life to be interconnected?
Was this for the whole panel?
Yeah,
was
anyone.
it for everyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone?
I'll let you guys.
No, you
I have nothing to say.
Me too. I have nothing to say.
Lee, I think Can you please just repeat the question again? I was trying to make sense of it.
Well, something that I thought about hearing it is how imagery really comes into writing so strongly, depending on what kind of writer you are. And imagery related to the body can be quite charged at times, and how you as writers navigate that charged landscape when you are, for example, describing a character. What is your process for that?
Okay. For my case, it's quite clear that, like I told before in the paper, is the body, in terms of this physical appearance, it's becoming my starting point of writing. So this, this is that's from that point. Then I'm thinking a lot about identity, and so, and then it's come that most of my works is something to do with identity, and it's all based on that body experience in the past time. Yeah.
Okay, now I can give it a try. Thank you, Ben. I mean, I was a bit lost there.
Yeah.
No, the one thing I can say, because it's the thing I was dealing with 5 minutes before I came here, is I'm writing right now. I've been writing for a few years a novel about a family of Shelknam natives from Tierra del Fuego, who were hunter-gatherers and had no contact with white civilization until the 1890s. Suddenly they were abducted by a French adventurer, taken to Paris and exhibited at the Universal Exhibition in a cage as cannibals from Patagonia, and fed raw meat to sort of shock the viewers. And all through this process, I've had to deal with the knowledge, the certainty that if I had been there, I would have been on the outside of the cage. So should my writing take me inside? Can it? And if not, in what ways do I walk around the cage to make what's happening inside that cage to those bodies who, I mean, the people of the time felt they had a perfect right to dispose of as they pleased. No? How does my writing navigate that distance? Well, this is, I think, the way I could answer the question right now.
I might add on that, I almost always write, I love imagery, I love vivid descriptions. When it comes to like tremendous authors like Larson and Morrison, their relationships, the bodies that they speak about and the characters that they have created didn't have, I guess I would say that the body was treated so much differently. It was, especially, I would say, the black body or the brown body. There were things assigned to these bodies by, at least the culture that I've grown up in and that I've read, you know, that I've never had to face. There was, you know, associations. There was senses of ownership from other people that I've never faced that in my life. And so when I try to inhabit something else, it's almost always an animal. Crocodiles, turtles. I do tend to think about the bodies of animals that I can come into contact with, because those are the experiences that I feel safest projecting my own senses of wanting an acid heart, wanting things like that, because I don't know that I could fully comprehend or I have any right to describe my body in relation to bodies that have been, that didn't have full autonomy. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers that.
That answered my question. Yeah, because I found your presentation wasn't so anthropocentric and didn't conceive of the body in purely human terms, which is a very old way of seeing bodies, especially where I come from, where at age 3, 4, you're supposed to know what a scorpion looks like, what a snake looks like, what it can do to you, what you can do to them, what a lion, what a leopard. It's a very old way of looking at the world. But my question now is for Ben. When you can't choose, when you have no way of choosing what kind of body you inhabit as a child, and in your case, you've transmuted your experience into writing. Do you think, at what age did you become conscious of the possibility that you can, make a departure from your normal experience, a daily experience?
Well, I can't remember exactly in what age at the time, but it's coming like coming with the life. I mean, it's, after years, maybe I got more a bit wise and not to be too sensitive. And then I think it's coming with all the life experience. It's like I cannot figure out when it's I came to that point. I mean, maybe it's starting coming with the process of writing. When I start writing, yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Ben. I want to follow on exactly what you said right now. It really stood out for me that the word selfhood is in bold in the last page of your essay, that you've been far from identities, be they ethnic or religious, since I've left them behind to arrive at the calm river of selfhood. And so following up on the previous question is, when did you arrive at that calm river of selfhood? Was it a moment that you remember? And have you had to distance yourself from your family? Because now you're more distant from the ethnic and religious connection?
Yes, the thought of identity is always a lot of question in my head. So I always, asking about existentialism. So how come I'm like this? How come somebody else like this? There's always around in my head. So, and then say, because of this childhood experience and the phenomena I saw in my country with like a race, common like a racial conflict and religion conflict, such things. This make me come to one conclusion that's actually we can't make a distance of ours any identity. So we cannot rigid one, but we are like a lot of identities in our self. So the selfhood itself, the word selfhood, I found from the Indian poet. His name is Rajit Haskote. He wrote this article about the identity, and it's very interesting. And I really like that his point of view about this identity. So he used this word selfhood to replace the identity, because for him identity is like a tunnel of vision. It's a narrow one, but the selfhood is like I can't remember the word in English because but I write here. It's wait a second, I will try to find here. Confluence. Yeah, confluence. So when the rivers, a lot of rivers came to one point. So the rivers of identities and come to, in this confluence, come to one point that's called selfhood. So it's not a rigid one. So that's yeah.
And I would just note the change in the metaphor from the verdict of identity, which would be a legal definition, to the confluence or the calm river of selfhood. That's a kind of a perfect manifestation of the distinction you're trying to make.
So just a quick question. In thinking about mind-body awareness, I can't also help but think about spiritual awareness. And you've all kind of touched on this a little bit, but just specifically in writing about the mind and the body, how did that elevate or not your own kind of spiritual awareness?
I'll start. So for me, let me start by saying that I'm busy now with a nonfiction book, and I've been writing fiction all my life. And I started thinking a lot about how my body and spirituality affect my writing. Because this nonfiction book showed me that it's very different when I'm writing fiction and when I'm writing nonfiction. When I'm writing fiction, it's very spiritual, in that I lose myself. And when I finish writing, I have to constantly go outside and take out whatever was in me and bring myself back. So for example, again, referring to the book that I've already mentioned about my village, when I was writing it, it was as though the character was living in me, and I had to walk the streets with her. Whatever was happening to her, I felt it tremendously. And I'm a very spiritual person. And sometimes it was like a conversation between me and her but you can't go there. Me as Yamkela, I can't go there because of my spiritual beliefs and stuff like that, you know? And so we had to kind of strike a deal to say, I will go where you want me to go, but there are limits. I will not go all the way. I think if you're a very spiritual person, you also want to protect yourself as a writer, and not go to spaces where you might be misunderstood, because that's not what you stand for. Yeah.
Usha, I think you had
So my question was, would you answer this kind of question about writing in the body? Would you have answered it very differently when you were young?
Definitely.
Do you think about the body differently now?
I thought that question was for me. It is for me. Yeah, well, as Chris said, quoting Walt Whitman, who is, if anybody deserves the title of being the poet of the body, it's one of the first names that comes to mind is Walt Whitman. The other one is Clarice Lispector. But at the same time, one becomes more aware of the body when you get older. I mean, when you're young, the body is a bit of like a useful animal, and you take it for granted. With time, you sort of realize how closely you are bound to it and tied to it, or as Yeats once famously put it, tied to a dying animal. And in my case, I mean, when I was younger, I would abuse the body to make it produce writing. You know, we all think we are Rambo when we are young, and now I tend to take care of my body. I watch what I'm eating, what I'm drinking. I do yoga. I go cycling, which is I prefer to running. And in that way, I somehow get my writing body ready. I find it much harder now to write when I've treated my body like a thing, like an instrument. And in a way, I think, and this is a sort of answer to previous question, I tend to prefer, I feel closer to writers like Whitman, who thought that the spirituality and even a mystical experience came from good health and an exuberance of vital spirits, than from certain religious traditions. I'm thinking of the Christian Catholic tradition, the one that is closest to my upbringing, where damaging, abusing the body was and is thought to bring out something spiritual, as if the spiritual and the physical were opposed instead of growing together.
Anyone else want to take that on?
No.
I think we've come to the end, and maybe I'll leave you just with two figures for writing in the body. I'm remembering long ago when you were talking about animals, visiting the Desert Museum with the wonderful American poet Patty Ann Rogers, and we watched river otter swimming. And it's such a beautiful sight to see. And Patty Ann turned to me and said, I can feel that river otter in my body. And I realized that in so many of her poems about animals, she was finding her way into that animal and identifying with them completely, and then the poems would come. And just to contrast that, I'm remembering in the early days of computers, the American novelist Russell Banks discovered by accident that when he was really writing well, he would start kicking his legs, and at least 2 times he kicked the cord out of the wall and lost 20 pages of writing. So, 2 thoughts on the body. Thank you so much to our panelists.